Chris,
Hello.
you are calling from West Virginia.
Yes. Excuse me if my Wi-Fi cuts out. We don't get good internet around here.
No problem. We'll see. We'll do the best we can with you. So you want to talk about destiny and free will coexisting?
Yes, and this is, more of a theological argument, and, you can still agree with it and be atheist, obviously, but this is more about, a lot of atheists I hear like to say that, God must be evil for allowing the evils of man. So this is kind of an argument to disprove just that part of it. But it's very scientific in the way I've built it up. So let's start by, have you guys read anything on, Stephen Hawking's view of free will or, Einstein's theories of relativity? You're aware, you know about these things somewhat?
I've not read anything to do with Stephen Hawking's views on free will. I know a little bit about the theory of relativity, but as I said earlier, I'm not an expert on such matters.
Well, Stephen Hawking in The Grand Design talks about how, since when the Big Bang happened, every particle in the universe was put into motion. Basically, all the future was decided then. You know what I mean? This first force put every particle into motion. And since humans are essentially biological machines, if you were capable of understanding every single aspect of the universe and how every particle behaves in quantum mechanics, you could essentially predict the future, right? Is that an acceptable argument?
Yeah, that's one version of free will. Yeah, of determinism, deterministic free will. Sorry, I'm getting all confused.
Hello?
Please carry on.
Sorry, you cut out for a second.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's an idea called deterministic free will, or determinism. There are slightly different examples of that.
Yeah, well, and part of, this basically tells us that we don't have free will since, if our destiny was decided at the beginning of the universe, then how were we able to make the choices, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, space-time relativity, and this is kind of a philosophical part. Obviously, nobody can prove this, but relativity tells us that the past and the future exist and are real as much as the present, right? Like essentially from an outsider's perspective of the universe, all things are happening at once. Can we agree on that?
What do you mean by all things are happening at once? I was kind of following you until you said all things are happening at once.
Well, essentially, sort of if you can exist outside of space-time, then you don't have this view that we have of linear time, right? Like,
I don't know how it's possible to exist outside of space-time.
Well, no.
How is that even a possibility?
I'm saying if you didn't have our perception of time, right?
The difficulty with this is that we're talking about relativity and saying that every point leading to the next point is relative to the next point on, which I agree with you about. But then we don't know that if we are outside of that whole picture, we would see something different because we don't have an example of that. All we have is this relative idea. So how can we even kind of get that forward as even a perceptible thing, because it's so alien to what we actually think the universe is doing anyway, and our perspective within it.
Well, yeah, that's my point. Like we can't have this perception of time, but relativity tells us that is the way the universe works, right? That's why it was so controversial when it first came up, because people, it seemed like such a foreign idea.
It did compared to the ideas around when Einstein proposed it, yeah. But that's not to say that it's kind of wrong. Anyway, it seems to have been confirmed by everything we've done so far. So, and I'm failing to see kind of,
Well, the point.
What's the kind of? Yeah, okay. Let's get to the point. Let's get to the point rather than kind of.
Okay, if the future existed at the moment of the Big Bang, then we existed at the moment of the Big Bang. And
That's
we
not
made
what
the
determinism
choices.
meant,
And
though.
it's not that,
That's
not that we don't get to make the choices. It's that we only
that's not
have
what determinism
one
means.
choice we can make.
Okay, Chris, I'm going to let Ben take this because he wants to jump in and have been talking for a while. So.
Well, because no, I'm not going to grant you that. Also, like, it sounds like you're setting up a nice little argument for determinism. And I know I mean, it seemed from your question in the call screening was talking about relating this somehow to free will and how these can coexist. I'm failing to see where you're making that bridge, and maybe I just need to let you communicate it. But it sounds like so far we have a lot of theory going on. And here's my issue for how we're setting this up.
Well, yeah, the theory of relativity.
Yeah, no, and here's the thing. Like, a lot of this theory, there's a lot of things that we can mentally masturbate about and come to different hypotheses of what's going on and what we think could be possibilities. But there's a huge issue when we take these and then try to extrapolate that out to what is happening in reality with kind of more mundane science. Like, because there's so many different theoretical ideas out there, and I think it's such a stretch to try to, and number one, also going with the fact that we all exist in this inside space-time reality that we're working with. And so having to bring in all this stuff, like, but what if there are things outside of space-time? I don't know how relevant that is to whether or not Richard and I have free will here today, or if we're determined to do whatever we're going to do. How does this apply to where we're going with this conversation?
I don't know if you're misunderstanding it. I'm not the example of someone existing outside of space time was just to get you to understand our perceptions limited. That's not any crux of my argument in any way.
Can I jump in just one sec, Chris? And I'll let you speak in a minute. I just want to kind of jump in one quick second because you're kind of the notes we've got on your call are destiny and free will can coexist. Now, I'm not quite sure what you mean by destiny, but if we're talking about determinism, I don't necessarily have a problem with determinism. There's an actual thing called deterministic free will, which says that, everything is kind of predestined, if you like, from things that went before it, but we still have the ability or the illusion of the ability to make decisions. So therefore we can still be held morally responsible for etc. Now, out of all the theories of free will, I actually lean quite a lot towards that one. I don't have a definitive there's not one particular kind of theory of free will that I lean towards over another definitively. It's like we were saying with the super chat question earlier, regarding worldviews. This is one of those things I don't have a definitive answer for. I kind of go on a couple of different of the theories. I kind of slide between them. But I think deterministic free will is a thing. Now, if you're saying when you're speaking about destiny and free will coexisting, that there is a thing called deterministic free will, then and all that implies from the kind of metaphysical aspect, I kind of agree with you. I don't really have an argument with you. We could talk about the nitty gritty, about the finer points, but I don't necessarily disagree. The thing I've got in my head where I might disagree with you is by using the word destiny, you're implying something other than determinism. And I think that's the kind of area I want to go down with you.
Too.
Well,
the point is, though, if you can accept this, right, that humans have free will, then God is not responsible for the atrocities of mankind. Right?
Yeah, see, this is where I was starting to have a problem with it, because you're taking this and then you're applying it to the problem of evil, which this is where we get into some sticky places. I'll let you kind of continue your point about exactly the claim that you're making.
Okay, well, another example of this, like, all right, basically, if we could travel back in time, right, which obviously we can't do that, we may never be able to, but if you could go back in time and for some reason your memory was wiped, right, and you went back to that point not knowing you were in the future and not knowing what would happen, you would always make that same decision. And this is predictable, but you still made the decision. Given everything that you knew about the world and everything that had happened to you and all the circumstances you're in, you will always make that same decision. So the point is that someone else didn't make the decision for us. It just seems like we don't have free will because we can only ever make the decision once. We can't go back and change things.
That's what determinism means. But
that we have.
Here's the thing with this.
I'm agreeing. This is determinism. I mean, you can, call it that if you want to, but that's what, if this is acceptable, then we can't blame God for the atrocities that man committed.
I disagree, though, with that, because I think there's some cases where some actions could come from humans that they had no choice in the biological factors leading up to it. Like, for example, I use the examples of antisocial personality disorder a lot. And we don't know a lot about what causes somebody to be predisposed to have an antisocial personality disorder. But like, if everything in the universe led up to somebody being born with a psychological abnormality that then would give them a conduct disorder and then an antisocial personality disorder in adulthood, like those things that led up to that were not chosen by that person. And if their brain works in a different way, and if God is the one that made their brain to work in a certain way, how are we going to hold that person responsible for not having the same moral compass that other people would have because of different brain chemistry?
So you're arguing that people with personality disorders have no free will?
Not all personality disorders. I'm citing a very specific personality disorder. Well, people do not.
Well, okay,
do you understand?
I have a schizophrenic brother.
No, Chris.
I have a schizophrenic brother. And yes, his actions are governed by his brain.
Chris,
and
are you listening to me? Chris, do you know what an antisocial personality disorder is?
I mean, I haven't studied it, but yes, I can understand it just from...
What's the criteria? What is involved with that pathology? What is this disorder?
Is that relevant to the person's ability to make decisions?
Yes.
If they're not making their own decisions, then you're saying they're not making their own decisions, right?
It is relevant because if somebody...
Well, no, answer my question, please. If they're not...
I am answering your question. Chris, I'm going to mute you. I'm going to mute you, okay? All right, you're going to listen to me. I'm answering your question because you've demonstrated that you don't know what this personality disorder entails, so I'm going to let you know. What we see with these people is they don't have the brain chemistry necessary to feel guilt about things that they do to other people. They don't understand moral consequences. And so that's why you end up having these people that end up in the system for things that they didn't know. They might know that they weren't supposed to do certain things because of consequences, but otherwise they cannot process how their decisions impact other people. So if you have somebody like that where their brain sets them up for failure, essentially, you're saying that that person has complete liability and they should have had the ability to make that decision, which, like, yeah, I will grant that they made a decision to do the thing that they did, but they're entering this with a completely different way of looking at it, to where they don't get the same biological feedback that a lot of us would. And so this is a case when we're looking at people like this in society, it's very difficult for us to say, what is the right course of action here? Because, like, you can end up going to very severe punishments for these people. But if you really think about this person may not have had the ability to actually think through what is happening. And should we hold them to that same standard, or should we find a better way to help them integrate with a society that wasn't built for them? And so it's an issue where there are a lot of exceptions and things where I don't know if we can overcome this gray area. There's a lot of gray here. And I'm going to unmute you and I'm going to let you address that. But does that kind of make sense? Like why I'm less likely to go with you?
Oh, well, no, I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying. And okay, can we accept this theory if we eliminate people with, you know, some kind of biological impairment, right?
No,
if
we can't. We can't. No, we can't grant you that because you are. I hate the word eliminate, especially for this kind of thing. It sounds very eugenics-y. But if you just take away the exceptions, if you take away actual humans that are the exception, this is the exact same argument we had with the last caller. If you just take away the exceptions and your argument works, it still tells me that your argument doesn't work because you had to remove a percentage of real people in order to make your argument
most
work.
I think most religious people would
Except that they
that,
don't.
you know.
Does God? Okay, does God have a different?
I didn't finish what I was saying.
No, does God have a different standard for people with differences in brain chemistry, or are they held to the same standard as other people? Like, what if God predisposed somebody to end up in a society that's going to treat them as less than because of certain biological differences, and to where they're going to be held responsible for things that they cannot comprehend? Is that the person's fault, or is that maybe God's fault for making that a biological reality?
That, you know, I personally don't think God would condemn someone for, I mean, the ways that they think or what they might do because of a certain biological, you know, I don't want to say defect, but, you know, something like that. But what I'm trying to get across here is that, I mean, all of these things are circumstances that led to this person's decision.
Okay, so if you can I ask you, Chris, are you a proponent of determinism, or are you a proponent of libertarian free will?
I would say more determinism based on my scientific beliefs, but that's what I'm saying. The more I delve into science, the more it seems that free will is possible, even if we have a predetermined. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That is a position. That's a legitimate position. I'm just asking you that. So, if God created things the way He did, knowing that these things were going to happen, and knowing people kind of, and I'm not sure about the nuance of what you mean about people being able to make these decisions. So let's kind of
the ability to make decisions. Just they're limited on, you know, their capability of making them logically, in a way. That's kind of
so. If that's the case, and God created people this way, knowing people this way, does He then have the right? And in your view, because obviously I'm talking to you and not a bunch of other theists, but does He then have the right, in your view, to kind of punish people if you believe that He punishes people by sending them to hell? Does He have the right to do that if they were kind of inevitably going to make... You don't follow that idea?
No, hell does not exist in the, ancient text of the Bible. The word hell...
No, I agree with you. I agree.
Viking mythology, and the translations of hell in the Bible can just be, you know, considered as an afterlife, or...
So do you think they're rewarded by going...
Huh?
This is taking a whole new twist. Do you think they're rewarded by going to heaven then, if they do the right thing, or if they follow God?
Which, I mean, I don't see much harm coming from that in any way. I mean, even if it's not true that people won't go to heaven, I think there might be a waste of people's lives if they dedicate their whole lives and to just...
Do you believe that people's soul go to heaven when they die if they've acted in accordance with God?
Personally, I mean, from a scientific view, I like to think of the afterlife as, I mean,
I
our
find it
brains get flooded with DMT at the end of our lives, and most people
I
who
find it very
experience
funny
DMT
that
say
like
it feels like lasting for thousands of years. But
I feel like it's very funny
that's
that
my
you'll
own
make a
personal
very
view.
spiritual claim and then say scientifically speaking. Like I don't think I don't know if
Okay,
science is
let
following
me
you. I don't think you can just say
let
that it's scientific reasoning and then go on at something spiritual. But
okay,
maybe I'm being
let me put
pedantic.
it this way. In my point of view, the best future for religion to have, because you guys know that it's dang near impossible to convince a religious person that God doesn't exist, right? You guys deal with that all the time. But in my perspective, the best future for the world is if religion becomes scientific. And you guys might think that this is ridiculous,
think
but
this
every
is
Christian I talk to
I
Okay,
think this is a
Chris.
dichotomy that we can you can't really bridge. I mean, you can apply some like religion can get some things right scientifically, but the reasoning behind religion and the reasoning behind science are different. And I don't know if they can really coexist without
I agree with that.
without compromising.
I agree with that, but only because most religions try to go by dogmatic law, right?
Okay,
Like if we didn't
so
have
Chris,
dogmatic law, religion could change to become something where, okay, this is my perspective. Since if God created the universe, which is what most religious people believe, and science is the study of the universe, then science must be the study of God. And I believe
Chris,
the future of religion
Chris,
through scientific thought.
I want to kind of, I'm kind of going to go back to my question. I'm sorry, Ben, and I'm sorry, Chris, but I want to go back to my question because I asked it for a very, very important reason, because I'm trying to figure out where your head's at within things. So as a religious believer, you, not religion as a whole, but you personally, do you believe that our soul goes to heaven when we die?
I hope not, because my greatest fear is eternal life.
Do you believe that it does, though? That was the question. The question was, do you believe that it does?
I don't like to base what I think solely on belief, and you would have to in order to make a statement of whether or not that's true.
So then how are you religious?
So I don't know. I do not know. I consider myself to be a Christian because I follow the teachings of Jesus, the New Testament, the parables of Jesus. Don't harm your neighbor. Don't judge people. These types of things. And I mean, the Old Testament. Lots of Christians like to claim that it's real, but as far as Christianity goes, I mean, the Old Testament is clearly the covenant between God and the descendants of Abraham. If you're not a descendant of Abraham, it doesn't apply.
You can have those beliefs, though, that you want to better humanity and do all those things that, I mean, there are some teachings that Jesus had that were like legitimately moral things, but why would you, if you're saying that that's really the only reason that you're a Christian, then why wouldn't you just have those views as an atheist or as an agnostic or whatever you'd want to call yourself? Why do you need Christianity for that?
You 100% can, and that's the great thing about this. My whole idea is about.
So then why do you need? So then why do you need Christianity?
Religion.
Do you have other beliefs that
you don't need it at all? But are you going to be able to convince millions of Christians to not believe in God? I'm saying it's a better way to try to convince them to worship through science, right? Couldn't we have a great world if people stopped worshiping God by saying stupid prayers over and over again, and they study real science and the universe?
Chris, I don't think that's the answer. I know I used to be very, very religious, fundamentalist, evangelical Christian, and I learned how to think about the world, and very quickly I figured out that religion wasn't the best way to think about it. Like I could not use that thought process and get to religion.
I'm talking about religion being able to change. If we can change religion, it can be good for the world.
Chris, no, that's okay. There are certain Christians that I'd rather be friends with than certain atheists because of their ability to change their beliefs. But the problem is what we should do, instead of conceding that and just saying, well, we should just make religion better for everybody, how about we just teach people how to be skeptical and teach people how to use logic and how to think? And then, sure, yeah, we're not going to be able to convince every single religious person to leave religion, but we can, I think convincing people of a religion, even if you're just using it for political or moral agendas, is not the way to approach it. I think we approach the thought process, and then if people are going to, right?
I'm not really referring to convincing people to become religious. I'm referring to convincing people that are religious of a better way. Because you can't just tell
right, and you can do that without
you have to show them a better way.
You can do that without buying into the religion and without just
how is it
going with their religion?
If you do it with religion? How is it harmful if you do it with religion? You can,
because their religion still has harmful things in it. The religion still teaches very harmful practices.
The idea of dogmatic law goes out the window, right? You can't say that the harmful things in the Old Testament people will still believe.
But the foundation is built upon those harmful ideas. So even if, then you get to a point of what do we cherry pick to make religion better and evolve, but you're still stuck with the harmful fundamentals of those religions, when we could just take a secular approach and teach the way to think about how to treat people better. I see where you're going with this, and Chris, what it
of the New Testament,
Chris, what it sounds like. The New Testament says a lot of things about the role of women in society and the role of slaves in society. The New Testament is still very pro-slavery and very anti women's equality. So there are still plenty of harmful ideas.
I wouldn't say they were pro and anti these things. They talked about them as people could relate.
Oh no, they had very distinct opinions.
Was very pro-slavery and very, held women back a lot. But okay, look at it this way: if the New Testament came out and condemned these things that were at the time integral part of society, nobody would have ever listened to it or have read it. So,
but it's still wrong,
if the gospel
right?
is to be read by people.
But isn't the gospel supposed to tell people? Chris, you're talking over me, and I'm really, really angry about that. So I'm going to mute you. Isn't though, if you're going to have a book that's supposed to guide you to the right place and to be a moral person, shouldn't the ideal moral book tell you exactly what the right way to be moral is? And that book would not contain proper ways to own slaves or proper ways to tell women to submit and be quiet in churches, right? There are still problems, and you cannot get around these. Chris, I think you're heading in the right direction with the right thoughts. I think that you're on the right track, but I think you're holding on to this religion and wanting to give it a place in your thought process and in your life. And I'm hoping that you can kind of see the problems with that and find your way to not relying on this crutch. Because I think you can get there, but I don't know if you see kind of the contradictions here. I'm going to unmute you.
Well, I think that what you're saying is kind of, it's still based on the idea of dogmatic law. Like these things that are in the Bible, people need to go buy them for forever. But that is not even that. Okay, you know why Jesus spoke in parables?
Then why hold on to this book then? Why hold on to the religion at all? That's what I'm saying.
Well, Jesus spoke in parables, which are you can interpret them many different ways to be applied to the situation you're in, to be applied to the times. And that's why
if your instructional book is so all over the place that you can interpret it in any number of different ways, how is that useful? You can't end up at anything.
It is useful to the individual. It is useful to the individual to get them.
But why is it
about these things?
If they're taking something that's written down in a book, and it could be any book, it doesn't necessarily have to be the New Testament, and they're just reading whatever they want into it. Couldn't they do that from any book? Why is that book in particular necessary for that? I mean, why that and not the Quran or the Tipitaka? Or in fact, just get rid of all of those.
Aspect in it where okay, let's look at it this way: a lot more people read the Bible than have ever read the works of Marcus Aurelius, right? You might agree with that. But
can't you have community without religion? Like, we have an atheist community. Why?
You can, but it's not as guaranteed.
It's not in religion either. Its community is not guaranteed in religion either. In fact, like, a lot of us versus them rhetoric.
Yeah, I agree.
The big thing that's guaranteed, and I can't even say guaranteed, but more likely to happen is an us versus them mentality of these are my people, those are those people, and we're a community in the fact that we are exclusionary and are going to say, well, at least we're not these people over here. Why do we need
that ideology only came about in religion whenever
you're giving so many excuses.
Started using religions.
Yeah, and Chris, if I may, if I may, you have demonstrated Ben's point yourself during this call, because you said specifically, well, that's the Old Testament. You know, why don't we just go by the New Testament? But some religious people, a lot of Christians, don't just go by the New Testament. The people who compiled and wrote the New Testament and worked out the theology didn't just go by the New Testament. In fact, that wasn't a thing. What they did was they went by the Old Testament. So you're actually demonstrating what Ben has said, that, you know, religious community isn't a guarantee, because religious community itself is divisive. And we can tell that because of the thousands and thousands of denominations that all believe different things. Well, even if we just take Orthodox Christianity and you have non-Orthodox Christians.
The polarity of religion is the only way it stops it from being tyrannical, right? If we had only one way of thinking...
No, sir, no. Let me stop you there. Right. I've just muted you because I feel it's important to stop you there and say that no, the divisiveness of religion has not stopped it being tyrannical. We've still got tyrannical aspects of religion. What it's done is it's allowed it to survive because it has adapted. That's what it has done. All these different aspects, all these different readings have allowed it to survive and go along with the time. So now we get Christians who say, oh, slavery, that was just a thing in the past. We don't do that anymore because it's not acceptable in society to have slavery. We have women bishops, which weren't allowed in the old days because it wasn't acceptable. It's that adaptation which has allowed it to adapt and survive. It's nothing to do with stopping tyranny. We still have aspects of religion that are tyrannical. It's not stopped that at all. I will unmute you. I'll let you respond to that point.
Talking about tyranny, I mean tyranny like ruling an entire country. One aspect of religion can't do that.
Of course it can.
How does one aspect of religion take over an entire country? Please give me an example.
Have you seen, I was going to, have you seen many Arab countries which are ruled by...
I've seen them, I mean, not personally, but... Yeah, well, those Arab countries you're talking about don't have a major polarity in their religions.
They do.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Have you heard of the Sunni and the Shia?
I mean, polarity is in many different religions, not just two warring factions. I mean,
they're not warring factions. It's a division that occurred right at the very beginning of Islam. And why is it during this call, whenever me or Ben have given you an example of anything at all, you have said, "Oh, I don't mean that. I mean this other thing." And you've kind of tried sidestepping the specific
you guys are misinterpreting what I'm saying. Is what I'm saying.
You said it. You said different interpretations get rid of tyranny and religion. That's blatantly not true.
I said the polarity of religion, meaning having.
How is that different from the different interpretations? How is that different from different interpretations?
I mean, like many, many different ways, and every person interprets religion a different way. There's no one.
So how is that different
that
from polarity?
Same views as the next.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
How you get
so people have different interpretations, which is a polarity, which is what we've just said.
And if we listen. What you're saying is that what I mean. You guys are stumping me a little bit. I'll admit that. But what I mean is that if we allow the polarity of religion, if all religious sects think that it's okay to have a different religion and a different way of thinking, that's what I mean.
But they're going to. And the fact that you've said, well, I think it should be this way, demonstrates that you are one of those people. You know, what's your solution? Telling everybody else they're not a true Christian and that they should all believe exactly as you do. Is that your solution?
No. Telling everyone that they worship the same God, but they just have a different way of doing it, which is necessary for different cultures.
That's not getting rid of a polarity, is it? That's not getting rid of different interpretations. That's just reinforcing it.
Not going to get anywhere, because with these different books and different interpretations, if you tell everybody that their God's the same, you're just having multiple different versions of that same God that contradict each other.
What I'm trying to do is look at God and get other people to view God and the worship of God through a scientific perspective where, essentially energy is God in this case.
Okay,
so now you're just redefining God. Okay, so listen, Chris, I'm going to let you go. We've got a lot of callers on the line. Chris. I don't want to go down the line of the fact that you've just reinterpreted God, because that's a whole other rabbit hole that we could dive down. Give us a call back and, let's have that discussion in future about God being energy. And we'll have that discussion at another time. Thank you for your call. I'm going to let you go.